Now, adding in the construction process, we've got the raw material extraction, material processing, part manufacturing and construction phase. Looking at the built environment, 6.2% for the carbon footprint has been required to produce and construct the building. Material production for exports and the developments constructed using these materials are not included, just developments in New Zealand. So the breakdown is 2.6% from steel, 1.6% from aluminium, 1.9% from cement and other non-metallic materials, e.g. aggregates, and 0.1% from the other sources. Now, looking at the life cycle phase, including the raw material extraction, material processing, part manufacturing and the construction phase, plus life cycle and end of life carbon footprint. When the life cycle and end of life emissions are added to the equation, a carbon footprint proportion for the built environment of 13% is found. This does not include the materials extracted and produced for developments abroad, just for New Zealand. Similarly to before, only this time we are including the exported materials, a proportion of 20% of the carbon footprint is found for the built environment in this scenario. Breaking down the built environment carbon footprint of 20%, energy used for production, construction processes and life cycle is 8.6%. Materials required for production, construction, processes and life cycle is 8.7%. Materials imported for construction and life cycle, i.e. specialised grade of material not available in New Zealand, is 2.1%. Waste to landfill for production, construction process and life cycle is 0.5%. Proposed for tackling the Anthropocene. New Zealand is now on the path to a low emission, climate resilient future. The government has committed to being carbon zero by 2050 and has established the Climate Change Commission to support this journey. MB has a significant role to play in achieving these critical long-term goals. One of these key areas is the building and construction sector. Goals for a carbon-free 2050. Buildings to use as little energy and water as possible, energy systems to be incorporated into buildings to enable them to generate the amount of electricity that is required for the building to operate as per usual, i.e. solar energy harvesting. As for reducing water consumption, try to recycle water as much as possible in the process, i.e. steel fabrication can use the same water repeatedly once it has been treated and is safe to use. Developments to be warmer, drier and better ventilated and provide a healthier place for people. This will provide restorative environments for people to work in and live in. Energy grid to be more renewable and partly driven by an efficient sector, harvesting energy and reusing to run the facility in that development. Number 4, energy efficiency, climate resistance, carbon literacy and using energy and carbon modelling tools must be an integral part of education throughout the sector. Sustainability needs to be introduced in the early years of education to show students how the environment can be protected in accordance with social, natural and economic resources. This will allow them to start thinking and research possible solutions in the early stage instead of waiting until they are working on a live project. 5. Reusing buildings and recycling materials to implement a fully fledged circular economy which should be supported by local supply chains. How will these goals be targeted? Settings to drive transformation, new institutes to help and guide clients, architects, engineers and contractors in developing a more sustainable development. Provide tools to the sector, introduce new frameworks for all stakeholders to work off. Establish a system that will deliver everlasting change, Courses delivered to students in schools, universities and further education training for members of staff in sustainability. It would also be incorporated by professional chartership bodies as compulsory learning objectives to become chartered. Change the attitudes and beliefs. Provide incentives grants to clients to choose a sustainable solution, i.e. 30% grant for using structural timber over steel. MB has committed to two main areas. Mitigation is the first area. Improving the operational efficiency of buildings, which will reduce energy and water use, and improve ventilation and building temperatures. Improved efficiency will lead to lower emissions from buildings and a restorative environment for its occupants. And 1B, reducing the whole life embodied energy, the whole of life embodied carbon footprint of buildings, which includes greenhouse gas emissions generated from the construction materials, construction process, construction waste disposal, and disposal of the building when it has reached the end of its life. Adaptation, improving the ability of buildings to withstand future climate change events. So what will be introduced for the built environment? Newly structured building frameworks. Framework 1 will be focusing on operational efficiency of buildings using less renewable and non-renewable energy, using less water and improving the air quality and temperature. And Framework 2 will be focusing on reducing the amount of greenhouse gas emissions generated by building materials, construction processes and disposal of materials known as life-embodied carbon. Essential factors incorporated in these proposals. Ensuring safety is maintained for New Zealand's buildings. Use of more advanced structures materials may lead to design tasks that the everyday engineer is not competent enough to design. This will be kept in mind, but it must be noted that upskilling and adapting to the new frameworks will be required from all engineers. 2. Costs associated with these changes to be introduced. An old building that needs to be upgraded to comply with the sustainability targets, estimation of total costs will be provided to the public. And number 3, a series of targets that the sector will have to keep under and plan for tightening the targets over time. There will be starting point to ease in new regulation framework, but this will become more stringent over time to ensure the targets are met. Tackling the operational efficiency of our buildings. The framework will set the upper limits for new buildings to obtain the consent under the Building Act 2004. Energy use, this will account for production, construction and life cycle phases. Comfort levels, providing a societally healthy and friendly place for people to work and live in. Water use, to limit water consumption beyond the recycled water from the building, i.e. rainwater harvesting, production, water harvesting, etc. So how will the industry be affected? 1. Construction materials. Construction materials, in order to meet a certain level of accreditation, some materials will not be allowed to be used in the development. For example, using timber over asbestos for external cladding. 2. Construction process. Rigorous inspections on how the surrounding environment is being protected, i.e. road sweepers, cleaners for dirt, dust mats and water sprinklers for demolition, etc. Modular developments will tend to receive a much higher rating due to the already built-in quality control and sustainability management process from the production phase. Number 3. Disposal of construction waste. Waste management on-site and in the production factories. A big factor will be on how waste can be reduced before the production phase has even begun. The key answers to this is to introduce building information modelling to quantify exactly what material, labour, resources are required. And finally, disposal of buildings after life. Maintain, repair or demolish is usually carried out using an economic analysis of the most suitable method. Demolition is usually the last option, but if the developer has brought the site to develop a new, say 40-storey hotel, it is difficult to avoid. Or can the structure be strengthened to carry that additional 35 stories? So this will result in pressure on the whole supply chain to reduce emissions, energy consumption for production and construction phase, transport emissions, rigorous waste management programs, incentives for designers and engineers to look for carbon solutions, i.e. lower taxes on carbon-friendly materials, and rewards for bodies illustrating outstanding contracting work to help climate change. How will adaptation be implemented? Buildings will be made more resilient to adverse events depending on the development's location around the world. Resistance must be in place for adverse events in the future, i.e. earthquakes, tsunamis, etc. Being more efficient in using resources that may become scarcer, such as water, harvesting and recycling of the resources, i.e. water, that is being used on a daily basis instead of disposing of it. The water consumption in all new developments must be aiming for net usage of zero over its life cycle. 3. Buildings to remain safe, habitable and at suitable temperature for periods of time without power in extreme weather events. 4. Having the right building in the right place. Planning stage. This means not granting planning permission for a 60-story building in the countryside. Different buildings with different purposes have the correct place where they should be located, i.e. placing a production plant in the country instead of a city to ensure air pollution is kept to a minimum for the local people, businesses, etc. And number 5, help drive more resilience in developments so that there will be better insurance availability, provision of materials and incentives. Live monitoring of buildings will allow parties to know exactly what's happening with the structure and how it is behaving. Upon these results, more certainty can be provided in future deals regarding the development. So MB 2020 Climate Change Action Policy Overview. Reducing emissions in New Zealand. Changes to building code to raise minimum requirements and enhance the way the system works. Set minimum level of operational efficiency for new buildings and set limits for the amount of embodied carbon in new buildings. Less energy use and less water. Less construction waste and less materials overall and more carbon material used. However, a more up-to-date climate change proposal has just been released. So what is the latest CCC draft proposed for the built environment? Energy efficiency of new and existing developments. Householders existing 6% reduction in energy intensity and for new 35% reduction in energy intensity. B. Commercial and public buildings, new and existing 30% reduction in energy intensity. So how will this be delivered? Improved insulation and greater control of energy use. New developments built to a higher standard. Existing buildings retrofitted to meet higher standards. Transition from coal to biomass using existing boilers. Electric and biomass systems only after 2025. Greater involvement by the government for development, land use, school, hotels, industry, etc. Transport, all new and existing public and private transport routes around New Zealand, infrastructure investment, road, rail, transport, etc. Urban planning and design, so that communities are well designed, supported by integrated, accessible transport options, including safe cycleways between home, work and education. Finally, implementing a circular economy, preventing waste to reduce emissions, followed by recovering, reusing and recycling waste before it gets to landfill, product life cycle, producers and importers responsible for the environmental footprint of their products, including end-of-life disposal. So examples of accreditation for the new development to design for: New Zealand Green Building Council, Green Building Council of Australia, International Living Futures Institute, Building Research Association of New Zealand. So let's take a closer look. New Zealand Green Building Council, more efficient use of resources such as energy and water, and provide healthy environments for people to live in. Green Building Council of Australia, commitment and innovation and relentless drive are helping to raise the ESG bar and spur worldwide transformation of the built sector to a sustainable net zero emissions future. And the International Living Future Institute, 7 petals to satisfy, place location, water consumption, energy use, health and happiness, construction material, equity, and beauty.